Believe it or not, but the federal government has committed robbery, hitting Toronto homeowners and everyday investors where it hurts the most, in their pocketbook. One hand was waving in front of your face while the other was reached deep into your pocket. It's like standing outside of the Colosseum in Rome on a hot day, looking up in wonder. Later, you reach into your pocket to grab a couple euro to go buy a refreshing gelato, only to realize it's gone. But instead of only a couple euro, we're talking much more. Tens and tens of thousands of dollars, and in some cases, even more. Get ready for a debate because this centers around the term fair, which is obviously very objective and unfortunately determined by the government, not you. On April 16th, 2024, the federal government released their Budget 2024, titled Tax Fairness for Every Generation. I'm already laughing. What, did they call them the fair police to consult with? This must have been right after the fun police left. Here are the key points to save you from having to read the entire document. It starts with, Canada is one of the wealthiest countries in the world. In order to build a fair economy, everyone must pay their fair share. Canadians pay tax on the income from their job, but currently they only pay taxes on 50% of their capital gains, which is profit generated from selling an asset. This is the capital gains tax advantage, and it's more pronounced in Canada than any other country in the G7. Canada actually has the lowest marginal effective tax rate in the G7. In 2021, only about 5% of Canadians under the age of 30 had any capital gains at all, and only 0.01% of Canadians under 30 are expected to have capital gains above the annual threshold in 2025. Budget 2024 proposes an increase in taxes on capital gains of the wealthiest 0.13%. Not the top 1% anymore, going after the 0.1%. To make Canada's system more fair, the inclusion rate for individuals with capital gains of more than $250,000 in 1 year will increase from 1/2 to 2/3. The inclusion rate simply means the portion of capital gains that you have to pay taxes on. Individuals will continue to only pay 50% up to the $250,000 threshold for that year. The inclusion rate will also increase to 2/3 for corporations and trusts across the board. The new rules will apply to capital gains realized on or after June 25th of 2024. When this news hit, it only gave sellers about 2 months to act, and of course it caused an immediate frenzy. I'm not kidding when I say I had 5 to 10 clients reach out that same day. Now next year, 28.5 million Canadians are not expected to have any capital gains at all. This means for 99.87% of Canadians, their personal income taxes on capital gains will not increase. Only 0.13% of Canadians with an average income of almost $1.5 million are expected to pay capital gains taxes next year. We're also looking at about 12% of corporations in Canada expecting to pay taxes on these new capital gains increases. Let's take a moment here. Have a sip of coffee. We're being fed statistical impacts on next year, but next year only. What about years to come? We are on the verge of the largest intergenerational wealth transfer in the history of Canada. The baby boomers are expected to pass down between $1 trillion and $3 trillion to their children, grandchildren, and other beneficiaries. Much of this wealth is tied to real estate, especially in cities like Toronto, where the market has skyrocketed over recent decades. Canada does not have an inheritance tax, so these assets would actually be considered capital gains. So let's put this into real life perspective here. Today's average sale price in Toronto is about $1,118,000. Now, if you bought a house 5 years ago in Toronto, the average price in 2019 was $819,000. And 10 years ago, in 2014, that sale price would have been $566,000. That puts the capital gains on your purchase 5 years ago at just shy of $300,000 and the purchase 10 years ago at $550,000. Under the new rules, the house you would have bought 5 years ago, you would see the increase up to 2/3 on about $50,000 of the capital gains. This would translate into just over $3,000 directly out of your pocket after taxes are paid. On your purchase 10 years ago, These new rules would see an increase on $300,000, which translates into just over $23,000 directly out of your pocket. Imagine if you bought a house 20 years ago, you would be pushing $50,000 in extra taxes as a result of this increase. And do you know who gets hit the hardest? It's your mom and pop investors who saved up their money, they worked hard, they made the right decisions, they bought a property, they put the money down, they put a tenant in place to start paying off that mortgage so that one day the property would be mortgage free, there would be some monthly income coming in, and this was probably going to be their retirement money. I wonder where the fair police was on this one. Here's the headline that hit the news about 2 weeks ago that I'm sure you did not even hear about. The federal government says it's deferring this tax hike until next year so that middle-class Canadians do not have to pay more taxes if it becomes official. If it becomes official? Now I'm really getting confused. This deferral will delay the tax hike from June 25th of 2024 until January 1st of 2026. Now I want to read something that the finance minister here said. Dominic LeBlanc stated, the deferral will provide certainty to Canadians as we quickly approach tax season. Given the current context, our government felt that it was the responsible thing to do. The responsible thing to do? I thought in order to have a fair economy, we had to pay our fair share of taxes. This is why the tax fairness for every generation proposed in Budget 2024 meant we needed to increase the taxes on capital gains. While the hike was proposed in the most recent federal budget, it hasn't passed in Parliament, which is prorogued until March 24th. In the meantime, Canada Revenue Agency had already started administering this new tax change on Canadians. The CRA said that they would only stop administering this policy if Parliament resumes and mentioned that they are going to actually delay this change. Let's circle back now on the second way the government has robbed Toronto homeowners and investors. I've already illustrated the difference in how much money you'll have to pay after tax if the increase happens, but let's look at the market of last year versus today. As I said, I had so many clients reach out because they're sitting on properties where they knew their capital gains were well above the $250,000 threshold. For them, they were thinking, well, I'd rather sell now, sell slightly under market value to avoid these extra taxes. Most of my clients had purchased these properties over 10 years ago, so you can just imagine how much money they knew that they would lose if this change occurred. I can confidently say that the market last April was not as strong as it is now. April of 2024, the prime rate was sitting at 7.2%, and today it's sitting at 5.2%. That's a 2% difference, and it's certainly translated into today's mortgage rates. Mortgage rates are also down roughly 2%, depending of course on qualifications, but we were looking at the mid 6% range to today being in that mid 4% range. Let's use the average sale price again of $1,118,000 for the City of Toronto and use a 5-year variable mortgage over 25 years with 20% down. In April of 2024, that mortgage rate would have been about $6,100. And today, it would be just over $5,000 a month. $1,000 a month gives buyers a larger budget and also approves buyers at a higher purchase price. Competition between buyers with more money in pocket and higher budgets is never a bad thing for the market. You can see how much of a difference this can make. Last April, a seller who was willing to sell for $50,000 less, thinking that these changes would come and they'd end up having to pay more tax than that $50,000, their decision-making was obviously affected. And if they had sold that property, that's money they're not going to get back. The government proposed a change in the capital gains tax and it never came to fruition. Sellers, investors were operating on information that the government was giving them, and it turned out to be false. Now the government is backpedaling because they realize that this might not have been a very good idea. Here is the main takeaway from all this. We are in an election year, actually a double election year. We have the provincial election and now we have the federal election later this year. You need to stay hyper vigilant and not take everything at face value. You're going to hear political fluff, ideas of what political parties will do if they get elected, and honestly, they may never actually follow through with that. If you're hearing news in the media or from political parties that you're just not sure about, feel free to reach out and we can take a deeper look at how this might affect your real estate portfolio.